I am eating a Peeps. Don't know why I felt like streaming it to know it, but I'm eating a Peeps. I do not know if I like Peeps or not after eating a Peep. Yes, I am trying to delay my fate with Okita, okay? But we will continue on. March 1864. There's too much stuff on my desk. There we go. It fast approached a month since I began living with the Shinsengumi, within the Shinsengumi headquarters. Hijikata-san and Sanan-san finally returned to the compound from the trip to Osaka, but spirits were low. Sanan-san's injury had unforeseen consequences for everyone in the organization. Day-to-day operations became hectic for a little while. His wounds seemed quite dire, and they drained whatever goodness in his nature he'd hoped to keep. Sanan-san would spend days holed up in his room, protected by a barrier of impenetrable silence. If he were to leave his room, a rare occasion now, he was often short-tempered and quickly retreated. Ah! The fuck? I'm fine! Okay. Come on. Okay. Even though I, too, spent days in the exile of my room, he seemed to take it much differently. Sanan-san seemed trapped within a painful memory, each day bringing him closer to a gloomy twilight. I softly pondered what service I could offer to the Shinsengumi if I were not allowed to search for my father. I'm sure Hijikata-san is overwhelmed with whatever business he's dealing with, but I need to visit him. I realize with tension so high that it's better to have Hijikata-san on my side rather than not. I crept around the hall looking for Hijikata-san, but he was nowhere to be seen. Would it be impolite to visit his room directly? As I paced around the hall in contemplation, an unknown warrior appeared before me. I had been living in the Yagi residence for a month, but he was unfamiliar to me. My current dilemma compelled me to approach him. Excuse me. Have you seen Hijikata-san? The man turned to respond, and my eyes widened to scan his enormous figure before he spoke. Oh, I am... Well, it's a long story. I'm Chizuru Yukimura.
副長が故障に取り立てたという見習い大使とはお前のことか。
はい。Koki. I wasn't aware they were telling people that I was an apprentice warrior at headquarters. However, my reputation was the last thing on my mind as I faced this man's pressuring gaze. I didn't appreciate the harsh scrutiny he seemed to impose, scanning me from head to toe.
お前、局長や副長とはどんな関係だ？同じ江戸の出身らしいが、どんな縁故を使って取り入った？
I did no such thing!
そう向きになるところを見ると、ますます怪しいぞ。ここは、お前のような剣の腕も才覚もなさそうなものが、うろうろしていいところではないんだがな。もう一度聞く。どうやって、あの二人に取り入った？この私、武田観柳斎が聞いているのだぞ。なぜ答えない？
He grew increasingly agitated, almost like a petulant child, because I refused to answer him. He reached his massive hand over towards me as if to grab me, but then a voice stopped him.
おい、武田！こんなところで何をしている？
When he recognized Hijikata-san's voice, he snapped his hand back to his side.
これは土方副長。何？近藤局長に少々用がありましてね。
ほう。俺は何も聞いちゃいないが。
最近お姿が見えない三段総長の代わりに相談に乗ってほしいと言われているのです。しかし、近藤局長もいらっしゃらないようなので、私はこれで失礼します。
Takeda turned to take his leave, but then he slowed his step, leaving us with a few words.
ところで、土方副長。そのものを故障に取り立てたというのは本当ですか？
ああ、少しばかり訳ありでな。
承知しました。訳ありならば、詳しく聞くのはやめておきましょう。ですが、あまり同じ郷里のものばかりを周りに囲うのはいかがなものかと思います。では、失礼。
Once Takeda exited the hall, I couldn't help but feel a rush of relief.
おい、雪村。本所の中を勝手に歩くんじゃねえ。
Yes, sir. I didn't mean to cause trouble.
お前の正体を知っているのは、このヤギ邸に寝起きしてるやつだけど、前川邸からこっちに来るやつらにも気をつけて。いいな。
Clear. I promise to be more careful going forward. So, may I ask who that man was?
あいつか。5番組組長の武田観柳斎ってやつだ。腕はそこそこだが、文学だか軍学の多少の知恵を持ってるやつだ。抜け目のないやつだから気をつけろ。それから、用がないならお前もこの辺でうろうろしてないで部屋に戻っていろ。
Hijikata-san attempted to dismiss me, having said what he felt was appropriate as a stern commander. Well, we quietly returned to our room. Understood. Although I was able to finally see Hijikata-san, I didn't want to walk around and cause trouble. So just as Hijikata-san ordered, I decided to return to my room. June 1864. June 1864. The fourth year of the Bankyu era became the Ganji Gannen, and the summer sweetly blossomed. Spring shed its blossoming skin, giving birth to lush green trees facing the wide open sky. During one of these During one of these beautiful summer days, I finished cleaning after everyone ate breakfast, and Saito brought me to the hall to Hijikata.
副長、斉藤です。雪村を連れてまいりました。
入れ。
Saito responded by quietly opening the sliding doors, gesturing me to enter the room. Upon entering, I saw Hijikata-san, but also Okita, Nagakura, Harada, and Heisuke in the hall. It appeared that only the captains who were aware of my situation were present.
随分と長く待たせたな。お前を外に出してやる時が来た。
Really? I could barely contain the excitement in my voice as soon as the words came out of his mouth. So, is it true there was a man in Fushimi that matched my father's profile?
真偽は定かじゃねえが、本人かどうかは娘のお前に確かめてもらうのが一番だと思ってな。
I nodded in response. For now, any information pertaining to my father was appreciated, so I was thankful. So where's this man who supposedly looks like my father?
伏見にある寺田屋って宿だ。これから斎藤に確かめに行ってもらう。
Saito's a sign. I wasn't sure if that meant I was to accompany Saito or if I would have to wait longer for him. Then Harada chimed in.
だが、行動さんがまだそこに留まってるとは限らねえだろう。ああ、伏見にいたってことは、今日の街中をうろついてる可能性もある。
その通りだ。だから原田と新八、それから平助の巡察にこいつを同行させて行動さんを探してもらってもいい。
俺たち全員でいつもは手分けして順番に見回りしてるのに。
Hijikata-san didn't bother entertaining a response, instead looking towards me. Was he suggesting these were the men who were responsible for dealing with me should I attempt to flee? Heisuke must have sensed this as well, and he made no attempt to push the issue any further.
言いたいことは分かりましたけど、この子のおもりを僕たちに任せっぱなしってのは気に入らないな。今日は確か土方さんも外出する予定が入ってましたよね。今後のためにも可愛い故障を同行させていろいろ勉強させたらどうですか？
何を言ってやがる。こいつが俺の故障っつうのはお前が勝手に言ってただけだろうが。
でも他の大使たちは完全にそう信じ込んでるみたいですよ。嘘から出た誠なんて言葉もありますし、相応の仕事をさせた方がいいんじゃないですか。
As Okita-san and Hijikata-san bickered at one another, the mood of the room was locked in their tense words until Harada whispered to me.
まあ、今の今日は物騒だし、無理に出かける必要はねえと思うぜ。俺たちも一応、行動さんの顔はわかるんだしな。
I could look for my father in Fushimi, or join the patrol rounds assuming he's moved places, or stay here to keep safe from the outside, or accompany Hijikata-san as his page. Damn. What should I do? Well, the guy says, unfortunately, we are staying behind in the headquarters. We know where this scene leads. Although my goal was to discover the whereabouts of my father, I wasn't completely sure that I was welcome to join the expedition, nor was safety assured. I appreciate your gesture, but I think I should stay behind today.
なんでだよ。行動さんを探すせっかくの機会だろ。
True, but I have to understand my place here, and I'm not sure he's there. More chances will come.
まあ、お前がそう言うんならしょうがねえけど、遠慮なんてする必要ねえのにな。
Afterwards, the men deliberated before splitting off to their directives, and I returned to my room. Perhaps I should have gone. Maybe it would have been better for me to take the risk and learn something, anything. I felt like an icy dagger was pressed into my chest, piercing my thin flesh with a cold blade.
後悔してるの？だったら一緒に行けばよかったのに。
Okita. I'm not regretting it. I was so ashamed, so I couldn't bear to look into his eyes. But he smiled wearily before continuing while touching my chin.
へえ、後悔してないんだ。僕とはじめくんがわざわざ土方さんに掛け合って君の外出の許しをもらってあげたんだとしても。
What? His revelation nearly took the air from my lungs. That was the last thing I expected him to say. A little while ago, when they tested my swordsmanship, Saito-san did make that promise. That they'd advise Hijikata-san to join their rounds. Did I really just waste their kind efforts, throwing away their promise to get me out? I'm so sorry. You two worked so hard to convince him and I...
土方さんに掛け合ったのははじめくん。僕は後ろで軽くうなずいただけ。
Even so, I'm sorry. When I see Saito-san later, I need to apologize and give my thanks to him. I can't believe I didn't realize from the start. I feel like I let them down. As I was coming to terms with my decision, Okita stared down upon me blankly.
ただ、勘違いしないでよね。君の剣の腕前をはじめくんはああ言ったけど、あの程度の剣技は巡察じゃ何の役にも立たないから。君みたいな腕を道場剣術って言ってね、実戦じゃ何の役にも立たないやつのことを言うんだよ。
He was ruthless, but his criticism was spot on, so I was convinced he was right.
ついてくるのはいいけど、不用意にその子たちを抜いたり、僕たちの前に出ようとしないでね。邪魔をしたり足を引っ張ったりしたら、君のこと本当に切っちゃうよ。
I understand. I nodded in a plaintive manner. Okita said nothing else as he turned his back to me to exit towards the inner court. Chapter 2 time! There's shit going on upstairs, as always. No news of my father came forth the other day, and somber restlessness took hold of me. Originally, it seemed Hijikata-san granted me approval to accompany the captains on their rounds through Kyoto to search for my dad. Then, he called me in. Excuse me. I saw Okita-san and Heisuke had been summoned along with me, and I felt a partial sense of relief. It did a little to calm my chattering nerves, and I didn't want to be in a bad spot with Hijikata-san. You called me? Hijikata-san seemed to be in a foul mood, so I decided it was best to act with tact in his presence.
お前の行動さん探しの件だがな。しばらく様子を見ようと思う。
Yo, hold up, I can't see shit. Hello! Shit, this is not where you go. You go over there, feed. Hi! Welcome. Things have been messed up. What? But why? We just started looking for him. Stopping now would surely cause any of our leads to run dry. His words stunned me. How could he back out on this? Hijikata-san remained deeply composed.
長州の連中が不穏な動きを見せている。本来ならお前を外に出せる時期じゃない。
I heard how the warriors of the Chosu domain associated with the Imperial Nationalist Party. For some reason, they find foreigners repulsive, using brute force to prevent any foreign presence. All of their faiths is aligned with the Emperor. The Shinsengumi, on the other hand, serve the shogun, meaning they are directly opposed. If the Chosu is active, it could mean that my own goal is of little concern to the Shinsengumi. It might become something of a burden to them. So, are you asking me to refrain from joining the rounds until things with the Chosu domain settle? Hijikata-san nodded and turned towards the two men.
というわけで、今日からこいつを巡察に連れて行くのは取りやめだ。
なるほどね。だから当番の俺らが呼ばれたってわけか。
Heisuke seemed 2 steps behind Hijikata-san's words, until this very moment where it seemed to click.
でも今までだってこいつが巡察に迷惑をかけたこともないし、別にいいんじゃないかな。
そうそう、僕たちに何かあっても関わらないようにしてくれればそれでいいし、どさくさに紛れて逃げ出すこともないしね。
Shut it, Okita, please. I won't run. I knew he wasn't being serious, but I couldn't stand to keep my mouth shut. Thank you! I made up my mind the minute the men of the Shinsengumi agreed to help me find my father. I made a vow to never run from the Shinsengumi for as long as they helped me find my father. My desire to find my father showed no signs of slowing, even since I first arrived in Kyoto. Should that be even or ever? I think both work. I will keep my vow. So please, please allow me to continue looking for my father. I bowed to Okita-san, keeping my eyes locked with his. His smirk, however, shrunk slowly as he gazed towards me, caught in between words to say.
危険を承知でついてくるって言うなら、僕の一番組に同行してくれて構わないよ。それに行動さんらしい人を見たっていう証言もあるしね。
確かにそういう証言もある。だが危険だと分かってるところにミスミス出すこともねえだろう。分かってるのか？お前らの足を引っ張りかねねえんだぞ。
I promise I won't cause any trouble. Please. If I lose the opportunity to search for my father, then the chances of finding him will sink. I lied straight. This sentence still makes no sense in my head. I need someone to read me this sentence to make it make sense in my head. And Hijikata simply sighed heavily.
市中を巡察する組長の指示には必ず従え。
Yes, of course. Thank you so much. I didn't know how else to show my gratitude, so I bowed deeply again.
行くか行かないかはお前が好きに判断しろ。
All right. I had to make sure this was the best decision. There was something in his demeanor that made me unsure of my desire to leave the compound. Still, if I was with Okita or Heisuke, I'm sure I'd be safe and well protected. On the other hand, my presence could be an undue burden to them. What was I to do? In this case, leave and search for my father. Huh? It feels like there are more people walking around than usual. The streets of Kyoto were packed with people shuffling into the shops and businesses all over.
土方さんの反対を押し切って巡察に同行してるんだってこと忘れないでね。
Sorry, I was distracted by all of the people. The city is filled with so much more cheer. I guess I just couldn't help myself. Okita's eyes twinkled and he smiled voraciously, and I could sense him relax. Voraciously, I don't know. I still want to say velociraptor and have it make no sense.
まあ祇園祭りも近いしね。街が浮き立ってるのは僕も否定しないけど。でも上位派老士たちの動きが怪しいのは本当だから。僕たちから離れて勝手に動くのだけはなしね。
We walked down Kyoto's largest street, alongside the First Division. No one came within a few yards of us. They stepped away the moment their eyes caught the bright blue of the Shinsengumi jackets. I noticed this phenomenon briefly when I first joined the Shinsengumi on their rounds, but it was clear the people of Kyoto feared them. Excuse me. I paused every so often to ask some of the less intimidated passerby if they'd seen my father. I'm looking for someone. He's in his 40s and speaks with an Edo accent. He's a doctor and he's a friendly bald man. After a few hours of searching, I met someone who claimed to see a man matching my description.
そんな雰囲気の人ならしばらく前にそこのマス屋さんで見かけたよ。
As he spoke, he pointed towards a store selling wood and charcoal. Thank you so much! Okita-san caught my eye and gave me a stern look. He looked as if he was going to reprimand me when...
貴様ら浪人か。手取りなら判明を答えろ。
The cry came from a Shinsengumi soldier, and Okita-san turned, his lips tightening into a thin line.
よりにもよってこんなところで騒ぎを起こすなんてね。
His hand dropped to his sword as he ran toward the commotion. Townsfolk shrieked and ran like leaves before a gale. In the sudden press of fleeing citizens, I found myself pulled away from Okita. For a moment, I panicked, but realized that perhaps it was best. If I stayed close, he would have been forced to keep attention on me. I hoped to avoid distracting him. I hid in an alley to watch, and I could return to the First Division once the tension simmered.
坊ちゃん、そこの坊ちゃん。巻き込まれんよう、うちの店へ入りや。
Huh? I paused for a moment. A strange man was inviting me into his store. Not strange on the face of it, perhaps, but I was warned many times to be on my guard. I was about to politely refuse when I realized it was the store to which the man pointed earlier. Excuse me, but is this Masa's?
へえ、そうどす。
Great. You see, I'm looking for someone and...
キエモンさん、このガキ、さっきまで新選組の沖田と一緒にいたぜ。
Huh? I'm not of the Shinsengumi.
新選組だと逃げろ。
No, it's not like that. I was just looking for someone. Even if I had been walking with them, the reaction of the store's customers seemed excessive.
君って本当に運がないよね。ある意味こいつらも僕もだけど。
He gave a small, unconcerned shrug and leapt through the door of the shop. Mosses exploded with a clang of blades, men swearing and scrambling across furniture. Wait, what is the meaning of this? What on earth just happened? When we returned to Shinsengumi headquarters, Sanan-san had a number of, less than pleasant words for us because he would! We kneeled for some time as the colonel berated us before Okita finally spoke up.
そんなに怒ることないじゃないですか。 僕たちは長州の患者を捕まえてきたわけだし。
When the fight was over, we discovered a massive arms cache and confiscated the entire thing. No one bothered to explain to me what was happening, however, and I was utterly lost.
怒ることではない。沖田君は面白いことを言いますね。マスやキエモンと身分を偽っている人間は長州の患者である古高俊太郎だった。我々新選組はその事実を知った上で彼を泳がせていた。
その通りですけど、でも捕まえるしかない状況だったんですよ。
まあ、宗司の言う通り、ある意味では大手柄だろうな。
でも古高を泳がせるために頑張ってた島田君や山崎君に悪いと思わないわけ？
The corners of Heisuke's mouth twitched into a smile, but Shimada interrupted him to continue.
東堂君のお気持ちもありがたいですが、我々のことはあまり気にしないでください。自分らも古高に対して手詰まりでしたから、沖田君たちが動いてくれて助かりましたよ。
Yamazaki nodded in silent agreement.
古高捕獲はすでに済まされた事柄です。その結果に不満を述べるつもりはありません。
お前ら首相な奴らだね。それに引き換え宗司は。
It didn't seem Nagakura was going to let Okita get away without rubbing his mistake in his face. Ah, Nagakura, we love you for that. Both Kai Shimada and Susumu Yamazaki serve as Shinsengumi officers and spies under Hijikata-san. Aside from the captains who stay in the Yagi residence, they are some of the very few people entrusted with the knowledge of my situation. In other words, these men were highly valued officers within the organization. Despite their resounding support, I felt a rush of guilt sweep over me, and I spoke up. I'm so sorry. It's all my fault. Some Ronin were causing trouble, so I tried to get out of the way. I got separated from Okita in the crowd, and I didn't go right back to him. Before I really realized what was going on, someone just started shouting at me.
君への監督不行き届きは誰の責任ですか?
He glared at me, his eyes hard and angry, and my throat tightly clenched into dryness.
一番組組長が監視対象を見失うなど、まったく情けないこともあったものですね。
When I'd first met him, Sanan had been nice, if a little quiet. After his injury, however, it was as if he'd become an entirely different man.
外出を許可したのは俺だ。こいつらばかり責めないでやってくれ。
Sanan looked up as Hijikata walked into the room. He gave the commander a tight-war smile, but only got a peaceful, impartial glance in return.
土方さんが来たってことは、古高の拷問も終わったのか?
ああ。風の強い日を選んで、京の都に火を放ち、あわよくば天皇を長州へ連れ出す。それが奴らの目的だ。
His voice was calm and measured, but we all felt the import of his words.
町に火を放つだ? 長州のやつら、頭のネジが緩んでるんじゃねえの?
それ単に天使様を誘拐するってことだろ? そんなとか言ってるくせにやることはめちゃくちゃだよな。
何にせよ見過ごせるものではない。
奴らの会合は今夜行われる可能性が高い。お前たちも出動準備を整えておく。
承知しました、副長。
よっしゃ、腕が鳴るぜ。
Even though each man displayed his professionalism differently, they were all clearly prepared. As it quieted down, Hijikata turned towards me as if he only had just noticed my presence.
それから高堂さんの件だ。 西国の者と一緒にマス屋に来たことがあるらしい。
What?
今日で見たっていう話は本当だったってことだ。だがそれだけだ。
My father with someone from the West? But my father went missing in Kyoto. How would he be with someone from the West? But no one had an answer for me. Preparations for the raid began immediately. Within moments, the compound was like a beehive, with soldiers and officers running back and forth. The tension felt thick enough to cut with a knife. I found it affecting me, despite my best efforts. My encounter at Masa's created some of their current headache, and I'd hoped to make up for it. Hey, can I... It became clear to me that I had very little to offer when it came to preparing for a raid. At the end of the day, all I could do was stay quietly to the side to avoid being a burden. Just then, I heard someone's voice out of the blue.
動ける大使が足りていない。近藤さんの隊は10名で動くそうだ。俺ら土方さんの隊は24人だったから。大使の半分が普通って笑えねえよ。
Ah, that's right. There were a handful of men who were bedridden from a swift food poisoning epidemic, leaving them short-handed in battle. They planned on dividing the troops in half. Kondo's troop will go to Ikeda-in, or Ikeda. Wait. Ikeda. Ikeda-in, and Hijikata's troop will head to Shikoku-in.
そういえば、あいつらは使わないのか。夜の任務だし、うってつけだと思うんだが。
Them?
お前らが減らしたけど、まだ何人か残ってるはずだろう。
しばらく実戦から遠ざけるらしい。調整に手間取っていると聞いたが、血に触れるたび俺たちの指示も聞かずに狂われてはたまらん。
What? I swore I heard something before about a reaction to blood, but this was something I was not supposed to hear. The two men hadn't realized that I was listening to their conversation. But it was crucial that I don't say anything.
奴らも浮かばれねえな。戦うために選んだ道だろうに。
3. 浮かばれないという表現は死んだ者に対して使うものだろう。
表向きは死んだことになってるが、本当は死んじゃいないしな。むしろ、めったなことじゃ死なねえし。
There was no doubt that what I was hearing was not meant for my ears. I shoved my fingers into my ears and closed my eyes tightly. The best I could do was make sure I didn't hear anything else.
雪村君、こんなところで何をしているのかね。
My eyes flew open to see Kondo in front of me. I couldn't just sit there. I told him the truth, how I felt so useless. I left my room to find some way to help.
なるほどな。君の気持ちはよくわかる。打ち入り前で皆も高揚しているしな。
Excited? More like bloodthirsty, to be honest.
どうかね。君も一緒に来るか。
What? That was not what I expected him to say. You mean go on a raid with you? I don't know what I could...
実は腹を壊して動けない大使が多くてな。人手が足りんのだ。伝令役になってもらえるとありがたいんだが。もちろん君に無理はさせん。
You raised a good point. Now that he mentioned it, I did remember hearing that Kondo-san's troop only had 10 people in it. Well, alright. If I'll just be a messenger. His face split into a grin, and I found myself on the way to the Ikeda Inn to accompany their raid. Ugh. Kondo-san's presence was revealing, and his good nature gave me comfort in asking him a question. Kondo-san, your uniform is different than the one your other men wear. Shinsengumi's unique light blue uniform made it so anyone in Kyoto would recognize them. However, Kondo-san's uniform was white, almost cream, setting him apart from his men.
これか暗いところに押し入った時にすぐに仲間だとわかるような。
I see. I didn't know the corpse uniform came in so many varieties. The usual uniform was well-fitting, and the colors stood out, but this white uniform was more elegant. I smiled while I looked at his uniform, and I braced myself for what was to come. Hour of the Dog! After we arrived at Ikeda, I was sent off on several short errands nearby. I returned to hear Nagakura talking to Okita.
こっちが当たりか。まさか長州藩邸のすぐ裏で会合とはな。
僕は最初からこっちだと思ってたけど、奴らは今までも頻繁に池田屋を使ったし。
だからって古高が捕まった晩にわざわざ普段と同じ場所で集まるか？普通は場所を変えるだろう。常識的に考えて。
じゃあ奴らには常識がなかったんだね。実際こうして池田屋で会合してるわけだし。
Nagakura and Okita's conversation was very lighthearted, which didn't quite suit the subject matter. Perhaps the Choso were trying to trick the Shinsengumi. I certainly wouldn't have known. Whatever the reason for their behavior, however, neither Nagakura nor Okita seemed worried. Heisuke noticed me as I approached and jogged over.
どうだった？会津藩とか諸次第の役人まだ来てなかった。
To be honest, I didn't really see anyone nearby.
日暮れ頃にはとっくに連絡してたってのにまだ動いてないとか何やってんだよ。
落ち着けよ、平助。
The larger man smacked Heisuke playfully on the shoulder with a bark of laughter.
あんな奴ら役に立たねえんだから。来ても来なくても一緒だろ。
だけどさ、新八さん。俺らだけで突入とか無謀だと思わねえの？
Heisuke frowned, and Takeda, who was on standby behind Heisuke, nodded in agreement.
この人数で踏み込むなど無謀にも程がある。ここは会津藩の援軍を待つべきかと。
武田君がそう言うなら分かった。もう少しだけ待ってみよう。
But no matter how long we waited, the officials never came. Hour of the Boar. I looked up at the sky. The moon inched itself further across the sky since we arrived at the Ikeda Inn.
さすがにこれはちょっと遅すぎるな。
近藤さん、どうします？これでミスミス逃がしちゃったら無様ですよ。
The chief had been quiet all this time, but when Okita addressed him, he finally stood up to speak.
これ以上は待て。宗司、長倉君、東堂君、俺についてきてくれ。
Okita nodded quietly but firmly.
では、私は表口を固めますから、皆さんご存分にどうぞ。
あ？武田さん来ないつもりかよ。
いいからいいから。中が暗くて間違って切られても困るし。あ、こっちが間違って切っちゃうかも。
沖田君、それはどういうことか
まあ突っ込むのは気心が知れた方がいいだろう。というわけだから武田さんは外を頼むぜ。
雪村君、少し池田屋から離れていてくれるか。ここは危険だ。老子が降りてくるかもしれん。もっとも逃がすつもりはないがな。
He stood up, smiled curtly, and ran to the inn.
会津中将お預かり老子隊新選組、戦議のため宿内を改める。
His declaration was met with a cacophony of yells and screams erupting from out of the inn.
わざわざ大声で討ち入りを知らせちゃうとか、すごく近藤さんらしいよね。
いいんじゃねえの。正々堂々名乗りを上げる。それが討ち入りの定石ってもんだ。
自分をわざわざ不利な状況に追い込むのが新八さんの言う定石。
Heisuke and Nagakura grinned at one another as they sauntered towards the inn.
御用改めである。手向かいすれば容赦なく切り捨てる。
Then the battle began in earnest. The yells of men and the clang of swords filled the air, rolling out through the doors and windows of the inn. I heard feet pound upstairs, the screams of men dying, the wet, thudded bodies dropping to the floor. Well, there was someone, but all the men who'd come with the captains ran around the back and couldn't hear Nagakura. Takeda, on the other hand, was stationed outside to arrest anyone trying to flee the building. What should I do? The only person left to go to help them was me. But even if I did, what could I do? Then, that was when I heard Kondo-san. Nagakura called out from elsewhere in the inn. Oh no! I had no desire to enter a slaughterhouse. Ugh. I had no desire to enter a slaughterhouse, with men killing one another. Even if I did, I had no illusions about my skill with a blade. I was sure to get killed before I even drawn it. But I could hardly stand around doing nothing. Perhaps if I couldn't fight, I could rescue the wounded, find them, and carry them out of the inn. I made up my mind, steeled myself, and ran inside. Inside it was pitch black. The smell of blood hit me in the stomach like a fist filling the air. There were dark lumps on the floor everywhere, the bodies of fallen men. Where were Okita and Heisuke? It had sounded like a good idea at the time, but as I looked around that charnel house, I realized there was no way I could carry two men outside. What should I do? Well, the guide says, look for Okita! I decided I had to look for Okita. I knew I'd caused trouble for him during the noon patrols, but he never called me out for it. It only seemed fair that I tried to return the favor. Ah! A Ronin came out of nowhere, falling down the stairs and screaming. My kodachi was in my hand before I even realized I'd drawn it. Then, Kondo-san's sword slit through his heart. Well, I just watched a man die. I was stuck in a trance of,
君が来たのか。他の大使は何をやってるんだ。
He did his best to act calmly, but I could tell my appearance had both surprised and worried him.
すまんが、掃除を見てやってくれるか。2階にいるのは掃除と老子が1人だけだ。掃除に限って負けはせんだろうが、敵図を追うかもしれん。敵も相当の手だれだ。
Yes, sir! I nodded quickly and ran off through the carnage. He's upstairs! I took them two at a time and landed hard on the top floor. It didn't take long to spot him. 2 steps at a time? I can't do that! I can't do that. I got short legs. I'd probably die. Only a few feet from me, Okita was battling a Ronin. I felt my stomach lurch. The cold ring of steel against steel tore through the air, and their blades flashed, lines of light in the darkness. The strange Ronin's eyes narrowed and his mouth curved into a smug smile. I'd seen Okita train with the soldiers, and his skill with a blade had been clear, but this Ronin... The way he dodged, parried, and slowly drove Okita back seemed almost effortless. The blood and violence that was choking me in had no effect on him, it seemed. He was so peaceful, in fact, and he hardly looked like he belonged in the middle of all that carnage. A smile split his face for half a second, and then he launched himself at the Ronin. Their swords slammed together. To my untrained eye, it looked as though the Ronin was a self-taught swordsman. His sword moved in large, crude arcs, while Okita responded with skill and finesse. In a contest of skill, Okita would have been the clear winner, but... As their blades sprang apart, it was always Okita who found himself pushed back. The Ronin's sword was heavy but fast. It was clear he was Okita's superior in raw power. The summer heat had turned the air thick and humid. I could barely breathe. Sweat poured down my spine and beaded on my face as quickly as I could wipe it off. What? I decided to distract the Ronin. Nearby, a bowl sat unattended on the floor. I said unshattered. Nearby, a bowl sat unattended on the floor. If I could use that to distract the Ronin briefly, it could give Okita the opening he needed. With every ounce of strength I had, I hurled the bowl straight at the Ronin. Hurled is such a weird word. Blah. Without almost thinking, he turned his blade and smashed the bowl to the floor. The moment of distraction gave Okita his opening. He leapt forward. Even caught off guard, the Ronin managed to get his blade up in time, but the bowl sent him stumbling back a step or two, an angry look on his face. As Okita lifted his sword towards his opponent, he whispered in a voice so only I could hear it. I knew now wasn't the time to bring it up, but I'm glad I'd been able to help. The strange Ronin's sword whipped through the air, little more than a silvery blur. Okita accepted the blow with the sword. However, the opponent's blow from above was too powerful. Okita stumbled ever so slightly, but the man did not miss his opportunity. The Ronin's foot slammed the center of Okita's chest. The source of his tremendous strength apparently extended to his legs as well as his sword arm. I heard a wet crunch as the kick connected, and Okita trembled across the floor of the room. When he stopped, I saw him gripping his chest and cough. Okita! I leapt across the room. Are you alright? His face was tight with pain. The most he could manage was labored gasps and wet, tearing coughs. Okita was in no condition to fight. As I struggled to move myself under his arm to lift him up, I glared at the strange Ronin. I watched the tip of his blade drift up to me. With a groan of pain, Okita lifted himself up and stumbled between me and the Ronin. No! Okita, you can't! There was a good chance he had broken bones. And if he was coughing up blood, then his internal organs could be damaged as well. He could barely stand, let alone fight, and he was making no attempts at hiding it. But he stood firm.
あんたの相手は僕だよね。この子には手を出さないでくれるかな。
The Ronin sneered.
その不祥で何を。今の貴様なぞ盾の役にも立つまい。
黙れよ、うるさいな。僕は役立たずなんかじゃない。
No flecks of blood appeared as he shouted. Stop that! You're still coughing up blood! The Ronin regarded us with cool, disinterested eyes for a few moments, then in one smooth motion lifted his sword and slid it back into his scabbard. What?
会合が終わるとともに俺の務めも終わっている。多少は面白かったぞ、新選組。だ。あの程度の腕でいい気になる。
His aloofness was amplified by the satisfaction he drew with his every word. He placed his foot out the window, crackling to himself as he jumped through gracefully. Did he just run? No, he hadn't run. He was letting us go.
くそ。僕はまだ戦えるのに。
Okita. His voice was weak. Why did you do that? Okita turned his head to look at me. You always said you'd kill me if I got in your way. So why had he protected me? He raised a shaky eyebrow.
そういえば、なんでだろう。
His words were already slurring.
僕にもよくわからないけど、でも次はちゃんと殺さないと。
Okita! His eyes fluttered and his body folded as he collapsed to the floor. Holy shit! Huh? I'd been so worried about Okita, I hadn't noticed. The sounds of screaming men and clattering swords had disappeared. Is it over? The moment the words were out of my mouth, I heard the sounds of labored footsteps on the stairs. Finally, the sun rose from the black sky. The raid itself had only lasted 2 hours. But for me, at least, it had felt far longer. There had been 20 Imperial nationalists at the Ikudain. The Shinsengumi had killed 7 Ronin and injured 4 more. I later learned that, with the help of the Aizu domain and the Kyoto Judiciary Commissioner, they arrested 23 people. The owner of the Ikudain had also been arrested, for trying to help the Choso rebels escape. The Shinsengumi had won an incredible victory, fighting against superior numbers in enemy territory, but they paid dearly for it. Okita had taken a blow to the chest and lost consciousness. Heisuke had been cut on the forehead, and the bleeding refused to stop. Nagakura had injured his left hand. One of the Shinsengumi soldiers lost his life at the inn's rear entrance, and 2 others were severely injured there as well. It didn't seem likely that they would survive. The Kyoto military and judiciary commissioners also fought the Chosu Ronin. With a successful resolution of the Battle of the Ikdain, the Shinsengumi had at last made a name for themselves. It looked as though the peace in Kyoto had been protected. Never could I have imagined that the ultimate result of their victory would be. End of July 1864. Weeks passed since the Battle of the Ikadain. In the meantime, the Shinsengumi grew stricter during their rounds to arrest the numerous outlaw ronin that escaped from the Ikadain. Rumors surfaced of extremists who were plotting to exact revenge on the Shinsengumi. Additionally, there were also problems occurring with warriors spanning from other domains, making things tense around the headquarters. Things were finally settling down. As a result of my efforts during the battle, they grew more encouraging of my involvement. The Shinsengumi allowed me to sweep the area in front of the headquarters on my own. One day, I was cleaning the courtyard with a broom when I heard gentle footsteps approaching me.
すみません。こちらが新選組の屯所ですか?
Oh, yes. The voice came from behind me, so I was caught off guard when answering.
君は?
Huh? Hijikata-san showed up suddenly, as if he telepathically knew I was speaking to someone. Oh, Hijikata-san, this man is... But before I could finish my sentence, the man ran towards Hijikata-san.
やっぱりトシさん、八郎です。お久しぶりです。
おめえは八郎か。なんだってこんなところにいるんだ。
When Hijikata-san realized who it was, his eyes grew wide.
驚きました。幕命で教視察に来てるんです。それより新選組って本当にトシさんたちのことだったんですね。この目で見るまでは信じられなかったけど、おめでとうございます。本当に侍になれたんですね。
おい、冷やかすなよ。まだ扱いは浪人と同じなんだからよ。
でも侍になりたいって夢が叶ったじゃないですか。
冷やかすなって言ってんだろ。
いいえ、江戸じゃ泣く子も黙る新選組といったらとても有名なんですよ。それに池田屋の話も聞いています。皆さんとてもご活躍だったみたいですね。
ま、ぼちぼちってところだ。
How very unlike himself. Hijikata-san seemed to be flustered, and his cheeks were rosy. Judging from their conversation, it appeared that this gentleman had come to visit Hijikata-san. The rhythm of their report, one of those words, seemed to suggest that they had been friends for quite some time. Once I verified the conversation had come to a halt, I mustered the courage to speak to Hijikata-san. No. Hijikata-san? May I ask who this is?
そうか。お前は初めてだったな。
まだ名乗っていませんでしたね。僕、伊庭八郎と言います。幕府直参旗本で大番士奥詰役を務めています。
Oh, I'm Chizuru Yukimura.
改めてよろしくお願いします。
Hi. Nice to meet you too. I don't remember how to say nice to meet you too because my brain ain't working. As soon as, I mean, even though Iba probably said it, my brain can't wrap around it. As soon as Iba and I finished our introductions, Hijikata was inclined to get us indoors.
まあ立ち話もなんだ。中に入ってくれ。
I took tea to the two of them in the hall. Hijikata-san told me to remain there, so I decided to listen in because there's nothing else I can fucking do in this room.
今日に来たのは奥詰めの仕事ってわけか。随分と出世したみてえだな。
An okuzume. I listened intently, but subtly, since I was unfamiliar with the contents of their conversation.
奥詰めってのはな、将軍の身辺を守る奴らのことだ。
Oh, wow! I am honored to meet such a man.
いえいえ、そんなことありません。父の仕事の縁でたまたまなんです。
But what would bring a man of his stature here, Hijikata-san? This meant Iba was someone who worked directly with the shogun. What an honor. It made no sense why he would interact with the Shinsengumi or why he had business with us.
お前の考えてることはわかるぜ。なんで俺と知り合いかってことだろう。
I did my best to nod without offending him.
こいつはな、旗本であると同時に江戸じゃ4本指に入る道場の一つ、新行東流伊庭道場の跡取り息子だ。その伊庭道場と俺たちがいた道場とはそこそこ交流があってな。その縁だ。
ええ、そうなんです。だからトシさんたちがいる今日に来ることになってとても楽しみにしていたんです。
勝手に喜んでろ。だが覚えとけよ、今日はそんなに楽しいところじゃねえからな。
はい、肝に銘じておきます。でもそんなに危険なのに女の子でも大使が務まるんですか？
Iba glanced at me when he asked his question, before looking to Hijikata-san. I gasped and cupped my hands over my mouth, and Hijikata's eyes darted towards me sternly. It would seem Iba picked up on the fact I was female, judging by their interaction.
もしかして秘密だったんですか？
I didn't want to confirm any answers, so I stared towards the mat underneath without speaking.
こいつはちょいと訳ありで預かってて、表向きは男ってことになってる。新選組でも一部の奴らしか知らないことだ。だからここでも下手なことを口にしないでくれ。
わかりました。トシさんがそう言うなら守りますよ。
Iba drew Hijikata in closer in a jovial manner, and Hijikata blushed at the notion. Hijikata-san is normally really uptight, so seeing him behave this way was startling. I had a lingering suspicion that Hijikata-san was actually enjoying himself. All of the commotion must have alerted the captains because they popped up from nowhere.
おいおい、八郎じゃねえか。聞いたことがある声だと思ったらお前だったのか。
新八さん、原田さん、それに皆さんもお久しぶりです。
そうか、お前も今日に来たのか。武者修行か、それとも狂犬物か。
なわけねえし、お偉いさんの護衛とか視察なんだろ。
まあ、はい、そういうところです。
あんたが今日に来るとなると、それなりの職務に就いたということか。
Iba nodded plainly in response.
ふん、君も今日に来たんだ。ま、死なない程度に気をつけなよ。
助言ありがとう。覚えておきます。
じゃあ今度飲みに行くか。なんなら今からでもいいんだぜ。
Each of the captains surrounded Iba and exchanged words. Most of all, Iba seemed lost in the amount of fun he had while conversing with everyone. I guess he really knew everyone back in Edo. Hijikata-san watched their interactions with warmth in his eyes and muttered.
あいつは旗本で伊庭道場の跡取り息子のくせに何が気に入ったのか知らねえが俺たちとつるみやがってな。
He seemed to be especially fond of Hijikata-san, though. But I couldn't dare say that.
まあちょっとした顔なじみだ。訪ねてきたら中に通してやってくれ。
Understood. Before we knew it, evening had come, and Iba told us it was time for him to depart.
それじゃあまたね。
His face seemed reluctant, if not a little forlorn, and he left the compound. I stared at him as he walked into the distance until his small figure was removed from my eyes. Iba was a mysterious person. Even if he was someone very important in upper class, he acted with integrity and kindness, commanding a lot of respect from the captains of the Shinsengumi. I did not think there was a samurai like him in the shogunate. '64. August 1864. After the fight at the inn, I was able to leave the compound much more often. I suppose after what I'd done, Hijikata-san thought I earned a little more trust. I didn't feel like I did anything extraordinary, but I wasn't about to look a gift horse in the mouth. I was genuinely happy that the man, Hijikata-san, approved of me. On this particular day, I was out on patrol with Harada in the 10th Division. Excuse me, Harada? The Shinsengumi is out patrolling day and night, right?
ああ、そうだぜ。それがどうかしたのか?
But what exactly is it that you do? Most of the men in the Shinsengumi were intimidating, death-dealing titans, but Harada was a rare exception, warm and friendly.
まあ、ピンからキリまで大小様々だな。筋切りや追いはぎはもちろん、食い逃げも捕まえるし、喧嘩も止める。
People who don't pay for food?
商家を脅して金を奪おうとする奴らも、俺ら新選組が取り締まってるよ。
It wasn't really the answer I'd expected. I guess the Shinsengumi's job is closer to a magistrate's than I thought. Thinking back, I remember how excited they were during the raid. What they did at the inn was far more intense than their day-to-day work. A little further down the road, a couple of men in Shinsengumi blues were waving at us. Nagakura! I guess our separate rounds brought us to the same spot.
よう、親父さんの情報、なんか手に入ったか?
No, nothing today.
なんかないかすんなって。今日がダメでも明日がある。そうだろ?
You're right. There was something contagious about his optimism.
で、新八、そっちはどうだ? 何か異常でもあったか? いや、なんも。けど、やっぱり町人たちの様子がせわしねえな。
I hadn't noticed it before, but he was right. They were acting strange, almost nervous. It looks like they're getting ready to move.
ああ、戦火に巻き込まれる前に今日から避難し始めてるってとこか。
What? War? There wasn't a war, was there?
そういや、まだ教えていなかったな。長州の奴らが今日に集まってきてんだよ。 その関係で俺らも警戒強化中ってわけだ。池田屋の件で長州を怒らせちまったからな。あいつらの仲間から犠牲が出ちまったし、黙ってられないんだろうよ。
Were the Chosu going to try something again?
さあな。まだはっきりしたことはわからねえ。どっちにせよ、俺たちは俺たちの仕事をする。長州の連中が今日に来ても追い返すだけさ。
They accepted their situation and never complained. I had a good deal of respect for Harada and Nagakura.
長州と戦か。もしかすると近いうちに上から出動命令が出るかもしれねえな。
So, you think that Aizu will give you all orders?
ああ、正式に幕府の一部隊として参加することになるかもな。そんな機会めったにないからな。せっかくだからお前も出てみるか。
I was perplexed by his sudden invitation. Does this mean I could march as a member of the Shinsengumi? It seemed rather inappropriate for me to ask to participate just for curiosity's sake. Still, I very much hope to be helpful in some way. Could I, perhaps, do something like what I'd done at the Ikeda Inn? However, there's also the chance that I become a hindrance as opposed to helping them out. I will stay behind. I'll stay behind. Harada seemed to possess a still heart, garnering a voice that was slow but at peace. He didn't respond to my words, but he smiled kindly. Part of me felt safer leaving, just to avoid being in anyone's way. But I also wanted to stay here, appreciating this moment of peace for once. Although, how could I justify participating when I wasn't a true member of the Shinsengumi? I bottled up my feelings of contemplation, and I just returned to the headquarters. A few days passed. Oh no. Your medicine's ready. I was carrying medicine and some hot sake. The medicine was Ishida medicinal powder, which was manufactured by Hijikata-san's family.
宗司と平助に飲ませてやってくれ。それから三男さんにも。
Sanan's eyebrows rose at the mention of his name.
おや、私も飲むんですか？私の傷はもう塞がっていますよ。
試してみましょうよ、三男さん。この薬って何にでも効くらしいですから。
Sanan-san rolled his eyes, but reached over to take his portion of the medicine and sake. He had been telling the truth, though. His injuries had healed, at least as much as they were going to, but his arm still refused to work properly. It was slowly becoming clear that it would probably never work properly again.
石田三役は熱燗で飲むのが粋だよな。羨ましいぞお前ら。
Oh my god.
羨ましいなら飲めばいいだろ。新ポッツォンだって怪我人じゃねえか。
酒は飲みてえが、残念なことに俺の怪我はもう治っちまってるんだよな。
Nagakura was injured at the Ikeda Inn, but he recently declared that he was completely healed, despite the fact his wounds still looked painful. This boy. I heard he had convinced Hichikata-san that his wounds weren't as bad as Okita or Heisuke's.
しかし、宗司と東堂君が怪我をするとはね。
あれは池田屋が暗かったから、普段の戦いなら遅れは取らないって。横合いから急に殴られたんだよ。おかげで八金なんて真っ二つだしさ。
拳で八金を割るか。随分と豪気な奴がいるもんだ。
Heisuke muttered something bitter and angry under his breath, but Harada just laughed.
あとなんだっけ、掃除から逃げ切ったやつもいたしな。
Okita only smiled quietly as Nagakura gestured towards him.
次があれば絶対に逃がしませんよ。次に勝つのは僕ですから。
Everyone began sharing their experiences at the inn. Saito, however, remained silent. Is there something bothering you? I kept my voice low as to not interrupt any of the other men and their conversations.
宗次らを負傷させるほどの実力者があの夜池田屋にいた理由を考えていた。長州のものではないと言ったそうだが、池田屋も人払いはしていたはずだ。池田屋の人間と老子たちの目を盗み、何らかの目的で侵入したか。目的は違えども行動を共にしていたのか。今確実にわかるのは、奴らが相当の実力者だということだけだ。
The sliding door suddenly flew open as Saito-san finished his sentence, and Kondo-san appeared.
会津藩から伝令が届いた。
As all conversations ceased, eyes turned to Kondo-san.
長州の襲撃に備え、我ら新選組も出陣するよう仰せだ。
A cheer went up from everyone present.
ついに来たか。待ちかねたぜ。残念だったな、平助。怪我人はさすがに不参加だよな。
でもせっかくの晴れ舞台だし。
He turned to Hijikata-san, clearly hoping that the commander might give him special leave to go.
不参加に決まってんだろ。おとなしく屯所で留守をしてやがれ。
土方さん、鬼、この鬼副長。
なんだ、そりゃ褒めてんのか。つまきにされたくなきゃ黙ってろ。
Eisuke's mouth snapped shut. I didn't think Hijikata-san would actually stab one of his own men, but neither did I think he would go easy on any of them, even if they were injured.
東堂君、怪我人は足手まといらしいですから、素直に屯所で留守をしましょう。
仕方がねえか。わかった。今回は留守番してるよ。
僕も今回は諦めようかな。参加したいけど本調子じゃないし、ちょっと外で涼んでこようかな。
Okita sighed and got up to leave. I assume I'll be staying here as well? Kondo-san nodded.
ああ、宗次と平助がダダをこねんよう見張っておいてくれ。
He let out a short laugh, and several men grinned. Before long, the Shinsengumi had left for the front, only leaving a handful of soldiers in the silent compound. So, what should I be doing when they're out? Oh, right. Kondo-san had asked me to keep an eye on Okita and Heisuke. I think Okita was in the inner courtyard. To be honest, I was a little concerned for him. He was still recovering, and being out in the cold air wasn't doing him any favors in that regard. Still, that left Heisuke and Sanan-san. Maybe they're still in the common room. Heisuke seemed particularly frustrated at being forced to stay behind, and Sanan-san had been even colder and more distant lately. I was worried for Okita, of course, but I felt there was something deeper affecting the other two. Where should I go? For a midsummer afternoon, the air was pleasant, making the courtyard a pleasant place to sit. He was sitting off in a corner of the shade, gazing up at the summer sky. I turned to look as well. It was a brilliant blue, and a distant breeze pushed white wisps of cloud at both ends. How long was it since I last looked up at the sky? Far too long, I thought, as I stretched out my arms up, soaking in the sunshine and cool, clear air. Then at last, I turned back to where Okita was, or perhaps had been, sitting. While I'd been enjoying the summer sky, he'd approached, and now he was right in front of me. My body stiffened, and I felt my eyes widen. He raised a quizzical eyebrow. That's not what I'm worried about. True, he didn't seem like he was desperate to leave and join the fight, unlike Heisuke. His mouth twisted into a small smile. God damn it. I decided to tell him. You're still not in the best condition. It isn't good for you to be out in the cold for too long. Okita had always seemed a little mean. Until that moment, I would never have thought I'd hear him thank me for worrying about him. I wasn't sure what to say. Both of us appeared to have run out of things to say, and silence fell across the courtyard. I didn't want to scold him, and then simply leave from my room, but... no, there had to be something thoughtful to say. I hope your injury heals soon. Not that. Okita laid his hands on his chest absently, and looked across the courtyard at nothing. He was right, and that should have given him cause for joy, but his face didn't change. He blinked and looked back down at me. Are you... thinking about Sanan-san? He'd made a point to say you, although he'd left it unsaid. I could see he was worrying about the man we both knew wouldn't be fine. I'm trying to process the sentence before. I don't know what it meant. Anyway, Sanan-san's arm wasn't going to heal, at least not completely. It would never again hold a sword. Okita said nothing. He cocked his head and smiled. I felt my cheeks getting warmer from blushing. Sorry if I was being too nosy. I apologized, but he warmed up and shook his head from left to right. I couldn't tell what his intentions were. Okita smiled deepened just a little. Weird? Maybe I looked upset, but he called me weird. He did call you weird. Fuck you, Okita. For no reason. Double fuck you, Okita. What? No, you shouldn't blame yourself. Okita hadn't done anything wrong. He followed his orders and did the best he could. I didn't see how he could say what had happened was his fault. When I looked up, his smile was gone, and I couldn't bring myself to say anything more. He glanced down at me, then looked at the sky.
今日の空綺麗だよね
Ah. The midsummer sun shone down, oh God. I felt a breath of warmth in the cool air. White clouds danced across the blue expanse, flying gracefully. Where were the men who'd marched off earlier now? I wondered. The Josu extremists' attempted attack on the imperial estate eventually became to be known as the Hamaguri Rebellion. Although the Shinsengumi were called to action, their efforts were stymied. I'll look that up at some point. And they found little in the way of glory. Communication with their superiors was poor at best, and they spent much of the battle waiting with the reserves. When the Shinsengumi finally entered the battle, each man found several strange opponents awaiting them. Chikage Kazuma, who defeated Okita Rikidaya, claimed to be from the Satsuma domain during his encounter with Hichikata-san. Kyuji Amagiri, the man who shattered Heisuke's headguard at Rikidaya, also claimed membership in the Satsuma. They had also met Kyo Shiranui, who'd fought alongside men from Chosu. Whoever they were, it was clear they were not allies of the Shinsengumi. Indeed, it seemed they could easily become some of its greatest enemies. If they were to meet an open battle, the casualties would be severe. More yawning. By the time the battle was over, the commanders of the Chosu attack had been killed in the fighting, or took their own lives. There were some soldiers, however, who escaped, setting Kyoto ablaze as they fled. By some terrible misfortune, winds that day blew from the north and fanned the flames, reducing the southern end of the imperial estate to ash. As a result of the Chosu attack, many imperial nationalists were executed. With the Hamaguri rebellion over, the Chosu were branded as traitors for attacking the estate. From then on, they were acknowledged enemies of the court. (1864) November. Oh no! The water bottle is out of water! November 1864. Summer turned into autumn and the Imperialists kept quiet. Despite my regular presence in the Shinsengumi rounds, no news of my father came in that time. Days passed peacefully, one after another. The leaves were dancing on the wind one evening as I busied myself with cleaning. Oh my god. Nice, why? Alright, almost done. Gradually, I'd been given more and more freedom to move around the compound. I was given a few duties to manage, and as long as I was doing them, I could go wherever I needed. On days that I can't go on rounds, I've been helping around at the compound.
Yo, 今日も精が出るな。
Oh, hello. I set down my work and turned toward him.
そろそろ日も暮れるし、適当に終わらせとけよ。
ほんと真面目だよな。毎日こんな遅くまでさ。
Are you on your way out?
ま、俺らもお勤めにな。
Really? They weren't wearing their uniforms. That meant they weren't going on their rounds. Oh, I get it.
ああ、島原までちょっとな。朝には帰るから心配いらね
え。一応言っとくけどな、もちろん飲むだけだぜ。女目当てで行きたがるのは新八さんくらいだから。
Ace could just run it on the crowd.
おい、ヘスケ。何も女の子の前で本当のこと言う必要ねえだろ。
So you are.
それはとにかくあとは頼むわ。土方さんが俺らを探してたらうまくごまかしといてくれ。
What? They left me with a difficult task. God damn it, Baka Trio. Anyway, I need to go finish cleaning up the courtyard. It was almost time for dinner, and I wanted to be done before I had to eat. I was dumping out the leaves I gathered when... Huh? Oh! I know what this scene is! Oh god, we're at this scene? I could hear some kind of commotion coming from outside of the house. What is that? I quickly put the broom away and hurried towards the entrance. Gathered just inside the front gate were about 10 children. Alright, that's a lot of kids. Standing in the middle of them was... Okita!
あれ？君が玄関の外に出てくるなんて珍しいよね。
What are you doing? Who are these children?
うん。誘拐とかじゃないし、安心してくれていいよ。
God fucking damn it, Okita.
ちょうど暇だったから遊んでもらってるとこ。
You're that bored, huh? Alright. I wasn't sure how to respond, but Okita grinned. So, are they all your friends?
うん。そんな感じかな。いつもお世話になってるんだ。
Oh. Usually, adults play with kids, not the other way around. Although making kids play with him did seem like something Okita would do.
もしかして僕たちと一緒に遊びたい？
He's looking at me with the kitty face. He's looking at me with his fucking kitty face. No. I shook my head. Is it really okay for you to let children in here?
土方さんに見つかったら、まず間違いなく怒られるよね。
Yeah, of fucking course. I think he will.
以前の三男さんだったら一緒に遊んでくれただろうけど、今は八つ当たりされそうかな。
Doesn't that mean there's a pretty good chance you're going to get in trouble? He just grinned with that kitty face!
他のみんなも怒りそうだしね。見逃してくれるのは君くらいだよ。
I'm dumbfounded. Then maybe you should send them home before you get cut.
俺たちのことに口出すなよ。どこで遊ぼうが勝手だろ。 屋は黙っててくれよな。俺たちは掃除と遊ぶんだから。
It looked like they were awfully fond of him. Could I really just leave them alone, though? That didn't seem right either. I thought about it for a moment before I spoke. This is the headquarters of the Shinsengumi. It's a place for men to do, work. You really shouldn't be playing here.
掃除だって新選組なのに、俺らと一緒に遊んでるよ。
Well,
どうせ大した仕事してないんだろ。
No, but that's because they're out on patrol. They're catching bad guys and keeping Kyoto safe.
今日の平和がどうとか言ってるけど、評判は悪いよね。人斬りとか。
These kids. Holy shit.
否定できないよね。僕たちは必要があれば人を切るのが仕事だし。これでも無駄な殺しはしてないつもりだけど。
I wasn't sure what to make of his smile. He's always talking about killing people. I probably hear him talk about death every day. To be honest, I don't have any idea how he really feels about it. Is killing people a big deal for him, or is it just something he does?
新選組なんて変なやつばっかり。俺らが命令される筋合いないよ。
You might have a point. I guess you've got a point. I had to admit he was a little convincing. I don't think they're bad people, but but they are kind of rough, I guess.
でしょ。しかも新選組はよく島原通いしてるって父ちゃんが言ってた。
How does this child know about Shimabara? Well, based on what happened earlier, I couldn't deny that. Among the Shinsengumi, there are a few exemplary people, but I guess from the outside, they just knew how to attract trouble.
もしかしてすごい真面目に考えてる。
Well, I mean, the Shinsengumi is taking really good care of me. It feels wrong not to stick up for them, but
本当のことばかり言われて言い訳のしようがない感じ。
Shut up, Shoji! はい。
君ってちょっと素直すぎるよ。
He's laughing in my face, up the counter. You don't have to laugh at me!
そんなに慌てないでよ。別に責めてるわけじゃないから。むしろ全面的に同意かな。新選組は悪い印象を持たれても仕方ない集団だと思ってるし。
I had to wonder if it was really okay for him to say things like that in public. He didn't seem to care at all, but that just made me more worried.
ほら、やっぱり新選組って悪い奴らの集まりなんだろ。
No, that's not it at all. Try as I might, I couldn't just ignore them, even if they were children. Yes, I know a lot of them are kind of scary, but they're really not bad people.
怖い奴が善人なわけないだろ。むしろみんな悪人面してるし。
I don't think so.
ほら、例えば土方さんとか、いつも厳しい顔してるよね。眉間に深いシワ寄せてさ。それに三男さんだって、笑顔が消えると、かなり怖い形相になるよ。
Well, yes. But he was siding with the children! Hello! I didn't know what I was supposed to do because it's fucking Soji Okita. Yeah! It's Soji. It's Soji. Well, I can't say they're not scary, but I was out of ideas. Kono-san, the chief of the Shinsengumi. He's really nice. He's a good person. He wasn't just good compared to the rest of the Shinsengumi either. Anyone who meets Kondo-san instantly became charmed by his warm aura. But the children didn't seem convinced. Fuck.
確か局長ってさ、すっごい鈍そうなやつだろ。
え？
ニコニコしながら散歩してるの見たけどさ。なんか頼りない感じ。めちゃくちゃ弱そう。他のやつらの方がまだまともっぽそう。
I think there's more to being in charge than looking like you can fight. Was that really how Kondo-san looked to them?
あんなのが局長だから新選組はダメなんだって。
Stop it! Stop being so mean! You don't understand! I took a step towards them, but Okita held out an arm and smiled to me. Oh no.
まあまあ、君もちょっと落ち着こう。相手は子供なんだし、そんなに怒ることないよ。
But...
そうじ、そいつ無視して俺たちと遊ぼう。
うん、そうだね。
Okita! He didn't even seem to have heard me, and walked over to the children with a smile.
君はどんな遊びがしたいの？高い高いとか、どう？
それでいいよ。掃除って背が高いしさ。
うん。身長がこんなことで役立つなんて面白いよね。
He grabbed the child.
高い高い。
Die, midget. Okita grunted with effort and lifted the grinning child up over his head. I had mixed feelings.
ほら、楽しい。いつもと違う高さって、それだけで面白いよね。
Please be careful with him. How long was he planning to leave him up there? It was starting to feel like quite a while.
あのさ、掃除。そろそろそいつ下ろしていいよ。
遠慮しないでいいよ。高い高いしてもらうの、僕も昔は好きだったしさ。
I saw realization dawn on the child's face, and excitement quickly turned to fear.
泣くほど喜ばなくてもいいのに。
His voice was cold. Okita wasn't smiling anymore! I blinked. Why was I just watching?! Stop that! He's just a child!
やだな。僕は遊んであげてるだけだよ。
That's not what it looks like!
ごめんってば。
君もどうして謝るのさ。遊んでもらった時は普通ありがとうだよね。
Okita, you're scaring him!
許してよ、掃除。俺たちが悪かった。新選組の悪口なんてもう言わないよ。だから許して。
Reluctantly, Okita lowered the boy back down. Holy shit. Fuck. I tried my best to calm them down and then quickly sent all of the children back home before Okita changed his mind. I thought you said they were your friends. If that's true, you really shouldn't be bullying them like that.
だってあの子、近藤さんをバカにしたし。何も知らないくせにさ、あんなこと言う資格ないよ。
So Hijikata-san is fair game, but he draws the line at Kondo-san? I suppose that shows just how much Okita cares about him.
なんで笑うの？
What? Oh, nothing. No reason. I mean, Kondo-san is a wonderful man. He smiled widely and nodded vigorously.
だから君が怒ってくれたの、結構嬉しかったよ。
Eh? I was confused about how to respond to his pleased look. I hope you can make up with him soon. I mean, they did apologize eventually. I don't think they're really bad kids.
わかってる。ちゃんと謝っておく。それから近藤さんがどんなにすごい人かも話しておくよ。
I smiled back at him. It cut both ways, but I admired Okita's honesty. The situation had been resolved, more or less. But as I began to relax, I suddenly remembered... Oh! We're late for dinner! Come on, we have to hurry. They're probably all angry at us. Okita just laughed.
もし君が怒られたら、ちゃんとかばってあげるよ。さっきのお礼にね。
Okita enjoys teasing me and, well, everyone. And sometimes he can be really irritating. He's not a bad person. Sometimes, in his own way, he's even nice. Saying how much he cared for Kondo-san made him less intimidating. I was lost in thought and fell behind, so I hurried after Okita and headed towards the main hall. Okita and nice in the same fucking sentence! Someone help my brain. Oh, we're at chapter 3. Hold on. Oh! Alright. It's the dawn of the new year. It was February of 1865, and when we finished eating breakfast, I was carrying a plate full of tea and opened the door to the common room. Tea's ready.
おお、すまないね、雪村君。
I made my way around the room, pouring a cup of tea for each person there, making sure not to spill. He gave me a warm smile as I handed him his tea.
やっぱり寒い日には厚めのお茶がうまいね。
Thank you. I felt a flush of pride at his words, even though I knew quite well that serving tea was hardly impressive. Just the same, I felt as if I was helping out in a way that was a nice feeling. Then Hichikata-san spoke, and his words brought me back to the present.
八木さんたちにも世話になったが、この豚書もそろそろ手狭になってきたか。
まあ確かに狭くなったな。大使の数も増えてきたしよ。広いところに移れるんならそれがいいんだけどな。雑魚寝してる連中かなり辛そうだしよ。だな、前川邸で寝起きしてる連中なんて毎晩押し寿司みてえになりながら寝てやがるぜ。あれじゃ疲れが取れねえだろうし、なんとかしてやりてえよな。
そんなこと言ったって僕たち新選組を受け入れてくれる場所なんてないでしょ。僕たち今日の嫌われ者だしね。
A person sitting beside Kondo-san pointed at the map spread upon the table.
西本願寺というのはどうかしら。
西本願寺ですと、先方の同意を得られるとは思えませんが。
でも数百人の大使が寝起きできるほど広い場所なんて他にないでしょ。それにあの場所ならいざという時も動きやすいと思うのだけど。
This man was named Kashitaro Ito, recruited by Heisuke a few months ago as the Shinshingumi's military advisor and deputy commander. He developed his notoriety teaching Hakushin Ito at his dojo, and he is known for his scholarliness.
それに西本願寺は以前長州浪士をかくまっていたこともあると聞きますわ。我々が西本願寺に移れば浪士たちは身を隠す場所を一つ失うことになります。
そこまで考えての選定というわけですか。なるほど。
Kondo seemed very impressed by Ito's suggestion, but a silent voice of protest arose.
僧侶の動きを武力で押さえつけるのはいかがなものかと思いますが。
Ito's brow twitched, as if disturbed by the idea, and he faced Sanan directly.
自社を隠れ蓑にして好き勝手な振る舞いをしていたのは長州浪士の方ではなくて、今日の治安を乱す不逞浪士に配慮して差し上げるなんて、三男さんもお優しいこと。
Ito's deflection of Sanan-san's words left a bitter taste in everyone's mouth, including Sanan.
尊上過激派を抑える必要があるという点に関しては同意しますが。
じゃあなんだ。切り合うときはやあやあ我こそはって名乗りを上げて正々堂々とやるべきだとでも言うつもりか。不逞浪士どもがそんな鎌倉武士みたいなご作法に付き合ってくれりゃいいがな。
三郎、口を慎みなさい。
もっと悪い。つい本音が出た。
The other man besides Ito was Saburo Miki, who joined at the same time as Ito. Allegedly, he was Ito's younger brother by blood.
皆さん方、ごめんなさいね。この子は昔から口が悪くて。三男さんもお気を悪くなさらないでくださいな。あなたのような方も新選組を大きくしていく上では必要だと思いますし、たとえ左腕が使い物にならなくとも、その才覚と学識は隊のために大いに役立つはずですわ。
I watched as Sanan-san bit his lip in an act of restraint to Ito's sour words. The tension was cut by another voice.
伊藤さん、今のはどういう意味だ？
Hijikata-san's voice was cold and sharp, like the sound of a blade sliding across a whetstone. Ito seemed taken aback and his eyes grew wide.
あんたが言うように、三男さんは優秀な論客だ。けどな、剣客としてもこの新選組に必要な人間なんだよ。
Hijikata-san only spoke when necessary, so it must have been something he truly believed. However,
ですが、私の腕は。
he couldn't even seem to bring himself to finish. It seemed as though Hijikata-san realized his words were reminding Sanan of what he used to be, causing Sanan-san to curl his lips into a frown.
ごめん遊ばせ。私としたことが失言でしたわ。三男さんは皆さん方の大切なお仲間ですものね。仲がよろしくて結構なことですわ。新たに入隊した大使たちも同じ気持ちでいてくれるといいのですけど。
Hijikata-san's eyes seethed with anger towards Ito. Kondo-san tried to relieve the tension by stepping in and clearing the air.
とりあえず豚書移転の件に関してはもう少し話し合ってから決めるということで。伊藤さん、この後お付き合いを願えますかな。先ほどの件についてもう少し詳しい話をお聞きしたいので。
ええ、喜んで。
Seeing the two get up, Takeda followed right behind them.
近藤局長、私もご一緒して構いませんか？
いいとも。ぜひ君も伊藤さんの話を聞いて大いに見識を広めてくれたまえ。新選組幹部といえど剣術ばかりではいかんからな。これからは広い視野と深い知識を身につけねばな。
は。
Kondo left the common room with Ito and Miki, however, who still sat before us. He smirked coldly towards us, and he slinked off to leave the common room. Okuta spoke once Miki's footsteps weren't audible.
まったく、誰なのさ、あんな人たちを連れてきたのは。
犯人はまだ江戸にいるだろう。平助の野郎、帰ってきたらとっちめてやる。伊藤さんは尊攘派なんだろう。長州の奴らと同じ考えの奴がよく新選組に入る気になったもんだな。
尊皇攘夷だからって長州と同一視されるのは心外らしい。そもそも尊皇とはどうかなんとかわけのわからねえことを抜かしてやがったんだよ。近藤さんも近藤さんであっさり丸め込まれやがって。
近藤さんってお人よしですからね。ああいう口がうまくてお腹の中が真っ黒な人に騙されやすいんだよな。
その伊藤さんが参謀で弟が9番組組長か。めんどくさいことになったぜ。
Eventually, Hijikata-san approached Sanan-san, who weakly hung his head, facing the floor in shame.
三男さん、あんな奴の言うことなんざ気にするんじゃねえぞ。
Sanan laughed dryly and shook his head.
伊藤さんは学識も高く弁舌に優れ、剣の腕も確かな方ですよ。優秀な参謀の入隊でついに総長はお役御免というわけですね。
おい、三男さん。
Sanan-san left the room as Hijikata-san's voice trailed behind, echoing in the hall.
三男さんも気の毒にな。あの調子だから近頃は大使連中にも避けられちまってる。
What? But why?
無理もねえだろう。 どんな言葉をかけても全部悪く取られちまうし、何を言っても皮肉と嫌味しか返ってこねえから、大したちも怯えちまって近づかねえんだよ。
Oh no, poor Sanan-san. Even though I haven't been here as long as the captains, I know Sanan was so well liked by the other warriors before his injury.
土方さん、伊藤さんたちなんて適当な理由をつけてさっさと追い出しちゃってくださいよ。あの人たちが来てから僕、毎晩嫌な夢ばっかり見るんですよね。
んなことできるわけねえだろうが。近藤さんはすっかり伊藤さんに心酔してるみてえだしな。伊藤さんと一緒に入隊してきた連中もそんな扱いをされりゃ黙っちゃいねえだろ。
役に立たない人だな。無理を通すのが鬼副長の役目でしょ。
んじゃてめえが副長やりゃいいだろうが。で、あいつらを追い出せ。
嫌に決まってるじゃないですか。そんなめんどくさいの。
The consensus was that Ito was not to be trusted, and it seemed no one spoke in his defense. Only one, during all of this, quietly sipped his tea. Saito quietly looked up at me as I poured more tea into his cup. So, what do you think about Ito? I mean, about Ito joining, that is.
さまざまな考えを持つ者が属してこそ、タイというのは広がりを見せるものだ。
So then.
だが無理に広げようとすると、内部から瓦解を始めることもある。
His words hung in the air, a dark omen for the future of the Shinsengumi. It was considerate of Ito to join, but his presence seemed to be a recipe for disancision, if not outright disaster. The setting sun glowed through the windows with a warm, rich maroon, an ominous kind of beauty. It's cold. I came out into the yard and my body stopped due to the cold. Guess spring will take a while. I wasn't too fond of Ito, but it was Sanan-san and his condition that truly worried me. I really wish his arm would just heal. That arm, or perhaps more accurately, the lack of it, was the source of his change in personality. Still... As nice as it would be for Sanan's arm to simply start working again, that seemed like the stuff of a child's fable, not real life. That was when I remembered.
薬でも何でも使ってもらうしかないですね。三男さんも納得してくれるんじゃないかな。
掃除、めったなこと言うもんじゃねえ。幹部が羅刹になってどうするんだよ。
Okita was talking about the Shinsengumi having some secret serum back in the day. Judging from how they spoke of it, it's an item with circumstances. But... And I was not to know about the existence of that serum. If I were to look into it without approval, there was no doubt that I'd be punished. But I'm the daughter of a doctor. I'm pretty sure I had more knowledge of medicine than the men of the Shinsengumi did. I investigated. I'm going to muster the courage to look into this. But where should I investigate? My room is in the Yagi house. There are some rooms that I am not allowed to enter, but the captains live here as well, and I'd finally learn how to navigate the building. However, there was another building that was part of the headquarters for the Shinsengumi, aside from the Hayagi house. Some of the leaders, along with the other warriors, live in the Maekawa house, diagonal from Yagi. And Sanan-san, who's injured, have been holed up in the Nambu residence, located behind Yagi. Since it's a residence, one cannot just stroll there casually, and since it is barely used by anyone other than Sanan, it is a little isolated. If there are secrets being kept from me, then they have to be kept in a place I'd never think to check. If I were to look into it, it would either be in the or forbidden areas of the Yagi residence. Which should I look into? We'll go into the Nambu house. Nambu house. Once I was quite sure everyone in the Yagi house was asleep, I made my move. So far, so good. Luckily, I was able to get to the entrance without anything happening, and I sighed with relief. Fuck! The surprise of seeing someone froze me. Okta, well, I'm not.
一体何が違うのかな。こんな夜中に人目を盗んで部屋を抜け出すなんて脱走以外考えられないんだけど。
Look, well, it's not like that. How was I supposed to explain to him? The more I panicked, the more I choked up.
冗談だよ。もし君が本当に脱走したら切っちゃえばいいだけだし。逃げたところでどうせ行くあてもないだろうしね。
You're right. He was right. Even if I somehow managed to escape the Shinsengumi, I would lose my best chance at finding my father.
何にせよ、さっさと部屋に戻りなよ。子供が遊ぶ時間じゃないんだから。君だってあらぬ疑いをかけられて切られたくないでしょ。
Maybe Okita was right. That it was reckless of me to investigate the serum, and thoughts swirled in my head before Okita spoke up again.
もし怖いものを見たら、すぐに声を上げて助けを呼ぶんだよ。一人で何とかしようなんて思わなくてもいいから。わかった。
He sounded rather serious for a moment. What do you mean by something scary? What could I run into in the Shinsengumi's headquarters that could be as scary as he thinks? He looked almost surprised for a moment, his face breaking into a weird grin.
そうだな。怖い夢とかお化けとか、あ、鬼副長なんてのもあるかもね。
That does sound scary. If Hijikata-san found out I was walking around the compound without permission... I'm going back to my room now.
そうそう。おとなしく寝てるのが賢明だよ。僕は中庭をもう一回りしてこようかな。
Okita started to hum as he walked away. I didn't expect to be found, especially by Okita of all people. There was no way I could sneak into the Nambu house behind his back. Maybe I could investigate the Yagi house before going back to my room. Wait. I was so surprised, I hadn't stopped to think. Why was Okita up so late? It was as if he expected someone to leave the Yagi house, but there's no way he could have known I would try. If not me, then who? It was the night at the Yagi house and dead silent. I tiptoed down the halls as quietly as possible. Huh? Were my ears playing tricks on me? Or did someone just walk into the common room? I would be in trouble if someone saw me, so I did my best to blend into the shadows and hide. After a few moments of heart-pounding seclusion, my curiosity got the best of me. I departed my hiding place and crept towards the common room. I peered inside. It was Sanan-san. I wonder why. Something felt wrong. I just stood there. What is Sanan-san doing here late at night? I was at a loss. Should I speak to him, or... Before I could make up my mind, he turned. Sanan gazed directly at me and muttered,
Yukimura-kun, そこにいるのでしょ? 出てきなさい.
I guess he spotted me. I gave up and made myself visible to Sanan-san. I'm sorry if it seemed like I was snooping or watching what you were doing.
別に叱るつもりはありませんよ。夜中に怪しい人影を見かけたら気にかかるのは当然でしょうしね。
It was very subtle, but I noticed something was off with Sanan-san's attitude. He's not chastising us. He had a peaceful smile, something I hadn't seen for what felt like ages. It was a bit too peaceful, as if his worries had suddenly left him. It was an expression I have never seen since he'd gotten injured. Sanan-san, did something good happen?
ええ、ありましたよ。というより、ようやく決心できたと言うべきでしょうか。
Something swished in his hand. Sanan-san, what is that? After his cryptic reply, he showed me what was in his hand. Sanan was holding a small bottle made from fine hydro. The glass was filled with a crimson liquid that looked like a poisonous chemical to me.
これは君の父親である高堂さんが幕府の密使を受けて作った薬です。
What? The shogun had ordered my father to do something?
もともと西洋から渡来したものだそうですよ。人体に劇的な変化をもたらす飛躍としてね。
What do you mean by utterly transform?
単純な表現をすると、筋力や自己治癒力の増強でしょうか。
It sounded like something out of a fairy tale. If such a thing were to truly exist, the serum would be considered a miracle cure, but...
しかし、この薬には致命的な欠陥がありました。
His smile twisted only a little.
強すぎる薬の効能が人の精神を狂わすに至ったのです。薬を飲んだ人間がどうなったか、その姿は君も目にしたことがありますね。
Of course. I'd seen the results of that madness the night I first met the Shinsengumi. Okita and Saito-san had killed off the monsters with the white hair.
君は察しがいいですね。そう、あの時の大使たちですよ。薬を与えられた彼らは理性を失い、血に狂う化け物となり果てました。
His words brought a sharp chill down my spine. ひどい。
切り合いの最中、血が流れるたびに狂っていては、強靭な肉体を手に入れた意味がありません。高堂さんは新選組という実験場でこの薬の改良を行っていたのですよ。
No! My father conducting experiments on human beings that made them go mad at the sight of blood? I couldn't believe it. No, I didn't want to believe it. But there was no reason for Sanan-san to lie either. I saw it before my very eyes. Then, did father really... Sanan-san shrugged off my disbelief and continued.
しかし残念ながら彼は行方不明となり、薬の研究は中断されてしまいました。高堂さんが残した資料をもとにして私なりに手を加えたものがこれです。
He smirked and shook the bottle gently. The liquid inside sloshed from side to side, almost lazily.
その原液をできる限り薄めてあります。
I had so many questions to ask him, but I didn't even know where to start, so I simply spoke the first thing that came to mind. If you drink that, will you be okay? So that serum, will it prevent you from going mad?
まだわかりません。誰にも試していないものですから。
His smile faded.
ですが、飲めば私の腕は治ります。薬の調合が成功さえしていれば。
You mean you're actually considering taking it? He had no guarantee that it wouldn't simply kill him outright, and even if he did survive, it might, well, drive him insane. Sanan-san, please reconsider this. I'm sure there's some other way. You don't need to rely on the...
こんなものにでも頼らなければ、私の腕は治らないのですよ。私はもはや用済みとなった人間です。普通の大使まで陰口を叩いているのは知っています。あなたにはわからないでしょうね。大いなる志を持って同志と共に江戸から登ってきたというのに、何の役にも立てぬままお情けで重職を与えられている私の気持ちなど。
How could you say it's pity? You're a leader here. The Shinsengumi respects and needs you now more than ever. Sanan-san's eyes dotted with melancholy, flashing a brief smile that entertained the idea behind my words.
よく覚えていますよ。私は剣客としてもこの新選組に必要なのですよね。
Sanan-san seemed bitterly focused on the words Hijikata-san said earlier. They really did affect him.
剣客として死に、ただ生きた屍になれというのであれば、 ると決まったわけではありません。そう分の悪い賭けではありませんよ。
Sananson smiled as he said that, but there was no way to know what might happen to him. Considering the worst that could happen, I couldn't sit by and allow him to do this. I think it's screaming time. Sanan-san came to hate himself for being unable to fight alongside his comrades and friends. Even if they forgave him, he never forgave himself. But was it the sort of thing only a fellow swordsman could comprehend then? How could I convince him to listen to me? It was then, in that moment of helplessness, that I remembered Okita's words.
もし怖いものを見たら、すぐに声を上げて助けを呼ぶんだよ。
Of course! I could never know what Sanan-san felt, but another man devoted to the sword might. I screamed as loudly as my lungs allowed, thank fuck, because I wasn't ready to scream, my voice echoing down the halls and across the courtyards of the compound. Never mind, I gotta scream! Okita! But even as I cried out, Sanan-san drew his head back and drained the vial in a single draught. No! With the soft clink of glass, it rolled from Sanan-san's palm to the floor of the common room. His face warped in pain and he collapsed to the floor. His hair began to turn white. It became clear to me that his pain was something no ordinary person could handle. Sana-san, you have to hold on! Through his fingers, I saw his maddening eyes. Before me were the eyes that greeted me on that first night in Kyoto. Behind me, I heard the door slit open. Sana-san looked behind me, over my shoulder. It seemed like Okita didn't even look at me. His eyes completely focused on Sanan-san. Then briefly the small bottle on the floor before back to Sanan-san. Okita, Sanan-san is... Sanan-san stared at Okita, his breath ragged and pained, like air struggled to stay in his chest. His expression flashed into a familiar grin. Even after Okita drew his sword, it still didn't occur to me what was about to happen. The polished tip of Okita's blade was pointed directly at Sanan-san. Sanan-san exuded calm at the sound of Okita's response. I held my breath, unsure if I wanted to see what was about to happen before me. Okita... You're not serious, are you? You aren't really going to kill him, are you? My voice shook with disbelief, and Okita's eyes paid me no attention.
君さ、やめてくれないかな、そういうの。よそ者は黙っててよ。
But wasn't Sanan-san his comrade? His friend? Everyone seemed to give their heart and soul to the Shinsengumi, but not like this.
鬱陶しいんだよ。新選組大使にでもなったつもり。
He didn't even move, but his tone hit like a slap. I've been living with them for so long that my initial fear almost completely disappeared. I felt like I'd found a place for myself.
忘れたって言うんならもう一度言ってあげるよ。君は利用価値があるから生かしてあげてるだけで、僕たちの仲間じゃない。
His words shattered my already breaking heart. But just then, Sanan-san screamed in pain, and I saw him kick the floor. Then I heard a horrific sound, like meat being cleaved and resounding through the darkness. Peeking over Okita's back, I heard the loud thud of a body collapsing to the floor, and around Okita's foot pooled the dark red puddle of blood. Sanan-san? I was trembling as I watched the blood trickle.
近づかない方がいいよ。
Okita's arm appeared in front of me coldly. What? But why? I gave him a reproachful gaze, but he showed no signs of faltering.
何度も言わせないでくれる。近づくなって言ってるでしょ。深手は合わせたけど、また襲いかかってこないとは限らないしね。あの薬を使ったら、この程度じゃ死ねないんだよ。
So, Sanan-san is still alive? Okita nodded bitterly. His body locked into a defensive position.
死ねないって言ってるんだから、生きてるに決まってるでしょ。
I was relieved from the bottom of my heart. Thank goodness. This good news, however, didn't mean we could let our guards down. Sanan-san could lose his senses again and potentially mortally wound us. But for now, at least, Sanan-san is still alive. After Sanan-san collapsed, the captains rushed into the room. They must have heard the commotion from the common room. Everything glowed white afterwards, and I realized that I was in a daze. None of their words stuck in my ear, and I wobbled back to my room.
まったく手間がかかる子だよね、君って。
Okita had taken me back to my room, and I heard him as soon as he opened the door for me.
説明してくれるかな。どうして三男さんと一緒にいたの？
Okita was never particularly pleasant to me, but his tone was even harsher than usual. I felt like there was someone in the common room. I was curious, so I had a look. I found Sanan-san in there. Okita's lackadaisical response seemed disarming, and he just scanned me. Although my mind had cleared somewhat, it was still difficult to keep my thoughts organized. One, however, rose quickly to the surface. Is it true that my father had something to do with that stuff that Sanan-san drank?
三男さんから聞いたのそれ。あの薬について。
He said it makes you stronger, but it drives you mad. He fixed his eyes wearily on the ceiling above us, sighing before eventually answering my question.
君は薬をここに持ち込んだ人の娘だし、狂った大使とも実際に会ってるし、少しぐらいなら聞かせてあげてもいいかな。本当なら殺しちゃいたいところだけど。
His manner of speaking was far removed than his usual joking self when he mentioned killing, but this time it felt like he meant it. He could kill me at any time.
薬のことについて何か質問ある？一つくらいなら答えてあげるけど。
I desperately searched for the words. Why did the Shinsengumi get involved in something like this?
僕たちの役目は今日を騒がせる不定労使を取り締まることだけど、簡単な仕事じゃないっていうことぐらい君にだってわかるよね。
I'm on the Ronin, and there are plenty that are actually skilled swordsmen. When I was on rounds, I saw many such men fighting and dueling amongst themselves.
今日に来たばかりの頃はとにかく人手が足りなくてね。僕たちの名前なんて全然知られてないし、給金だって満足に出なかったからさ。入隊希望者なんてめったにいないし、たまに来ても得体の知れないゴロつきばっかり。そんな時、幕府の人が薬の実験を持ちかけてきたんだ。
An experiment. That must have been what Sanan-san was referring to. So you knew what the side effects were and you still made them take it?
もちろん彼らも承知の上だよ。新選組にはね、局中ハットっていうのがあるんだ。隊をまとめるための決まりみたいなものなんだけど、それに背くと即切腹を申し付けられる。
Cut yourself open?
あれ、何を驚いてるの？武士の責任の取り方って言えば切腹しかないじゃない。
Traditionally, when samurai disgraced themselves, they drove their swords into their bellies. I had thought such traditions were obsolete, and that now the worst they could do is pretend to cut themselves open with a fan.
でもまあ、どうせ死んじゃうんだし、最後にもう一度役に立ってもらった方がいいでしょ。だから、切腹するか、薬を飲むか、好きな方を選んでもらうことにしたんだ。かわいそうだよね、本当に。
I couldn't think of anything to say. What sort of a choice was that? Death by your own hand, or madness and death by someone else's? The men that I'd encountered that winter night had their last thoughts as men been hope they might survive the madness? It sounded horrible.
簡単に強くなれる薬があれば便利だよね。実際は全然大したことなかったんだけど、僕たちでも簡単に切っちゃえるぐらい。
In a moment, I was taken back to that fateful night when Okita dispatched the warriors with white hair without any effort.
三男さんはこれからどうなるんだろうね。
I was worried too. Was Sana-san okay? Would he change? My stomach was twisting itself into knots. And so the long night broke, and this is where we're gonna end it, because I'm hungry. I need to eat something before we do art stream. Whoa. And during art stream, we're gonna spin a wheel. We're going to pick, we're gonna let the wheel decide our team for Splatfest and Splatoon 3. That was just announced. That is so fitting because it's taking place in May. And Tears of the Kingdom comes out in May, so it's an appropriate collaboration Splatfest. And we're gonna let it choose our fate. But, yeah. This is the end of Hakuoki for today. We'll be back tomorrow with more Hakuoki. And in a few hours, we're gonna do some art. I bid you guys farewell. Goodbye.